what is worth me keeping hold of?
Mm.
What is not? What's going to drain my energy? I think this is a period of time that's really key for sensitives because, a lot of us do have that tendency to take on too much,
Mm.
be a bit, appeasing, maybe people pleasing.
Mm.
And it's that time when we can look to nature and think, okay, the trees are letting some stuff go. What can I let go? And what is really worth my energy?
Welcome to Sensitive Stories. This episode is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for treatment with a mental health or medical professional. Let's dive in. Nichola, I want to welcome you back onto the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here to share
Oh,
with us
thank
once
you.
again. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, really grateful to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, so you were on episode 33. We talked about seasonal
Hmm.
self-care, and we're going to
Yeah.
be diving a little deeper into that topic. But before we start, I'm wondering if you could give us just a little snapshot of what each season might teach us. If there's one thing that we learn from each.
Yeah. There's so much.
Yeah.
So much. I've been doing this for a while now personally and weaving it into my teaching for a while. Just so many layers to each season. And I think before I just get into each season, it's also worth just keeping in mind that within the seasons of nature,
Mm.
we also have our own personal seasons as well, which interact in this beautiful organic way, which can, it's almost like a lens, your own personal lens through whichever season you're in. Um, and I wanted to start with that because, for example, in the spring, you've got that energy of like renewal and growth and
Mm.
hope and kind of emergence after a period of dormancy. And if you are in a season of your life where you are generally in a bit of a winter,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a dark night of the soul, or however you want to frame it, maybe I know we're going to come to grief, maybe you are in grief, um, you might not feel so springy,
Yes.
if you know what I mean, but the kind of more
Mm-hmm.
typical energies of spring. So I just wanted to preface with that in case any listeners are thinking, well, I'm definitely not feeling like that at this
Yeah.
point. Equally, we might be in like a real summer phase of our life. Maybe we're on a roll at work, we're in a real good time, with our family, and so maybe we don't feel like the hunkering down
Mm.
so much. So yeah, I just wanted to start with that. However, that being said, I'll start with spring. It feels
Mm-hmm.
logical. It is that time when things are starting to, warm up outside. We start to
Mm-hmm.
see those signs of nature more fully. There's nothing better, is there, than like a really beautiful spring day where the sun's out. You can see the blossoms on the
Mm-hmm.
trees and bulbs appearing. And I think it really does bring that feeling of hope. So it can teach us a lot about that, you know, kind of use of dreaming and what might lie ahead and, feeling gratitude for nature, for
Mm-hmm.
example. I also think it can teach us, and this is something that I've been working with a little bit because I think for me personally, I don't know about any other HSPs, but I think spring can potentially be one of the more challenging times for sensitives. I can talk about that a little bit in a while, but spring, I think, can teach us of the struggle involved in growth.
Mm.
That, it really doesn't happen easy. The leaves pushing through the earth. There's a great struggle involved in that. It's not like an easy transit. We just slide into full bloom. There's a real
Yeah.
kind of pushing through the
Mm.
crust almost, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can teach us a lot about kind of resilience and perseverance, and kind of digging into our foundations in order to,
Mm.
yeah, grow. And then, of course, you've got the summer, which often people describe it as their favorite time of the year. Not always. I'm an autumn girl. Um, but it can be a time to really anchor into present moment, awareness, abundance, joy. Um, I think it also encourages us to lean into celebrating ourselves and really honoring our own kind of vibrancy, our own light, etc. And maybe teaching us about how to shine in our authenticity, maybe. And then we've got autumn, which is I love autumn. I just love it so much. That I love that bit where it transitions from late summer into early autumn. It's just gorgeous. Anyway, obviously it might seem a little bit obvious, but autumn can teach us a lot about letting go, about releasing. If we just think about the life cycle of the trees, deciduous trees, obviously, but even evergreen, they'll draw their resources in. They'll let go of anything that they need. They're drawing their resources in. And one of the words I work with a lot in autumn is discernment. It's a real time to really think, okay, we're going into the colder months shortly. What is worth me keeping hold of? What is not? What's going to drain my energy? I think this is a period of time that's really key for sensitives because, a lot of us do have that tendency to take on too much, be a bit, appeasing, maybe people pleasing. And it's that time when we can look to nature and think, okay, the trees are letting some stuff go. What can I let go? And what is really worth my energy? So yeah, I really like that word discernment around that time. And then of course we've got winter, which is where we are right now as we're recording, and rest, rest, deep hibernation, rest. I think a lot of people shy away from this. Obviously, we've got a modern world which really wants us to believe the idea that productivity is a 24/7 thing, and that is our worth can be surmised by what we produce, and it's just not true. We are nature. I know we like to parcel ourselves up into our neat boxes, houses, and we forget that we are nature. And nature is cyclical. Everywhere you look, it's cyclical. And so this period of winter for deep, deep rest, not just having a little nap, like soul rest, not being so busy in the mind, just coming back to your center. I mean, if you think about ancestrally, what would be happening in winter is, they'd be enjoying their preserved foods. They might be gathered around fires, telling stories, huddling up and sleeping a lot. So just slowing down. It's not a time to be busy. But the other thing about winter, and I've been talking a lot about this recently in class with my students, is it's not just about rest. I mean, that's a huge part of winter, but it's also about the stillness and the introspection and what that affords us for the next part of the cycle. So when we are quiet, still, we're resting, it gives us time to reflect and go, on a practical level, our ancestors would have gone, that was the harvest this year, guys. What went wrong? How can we do better? What might we do differently next time around, or whatever? And the same is for us. We can go into our metaphorical cave and just reflect and think, okay, what worked for me that this cycle just gone by, and importantly, what is it I value most? Am I living my values? And as the next cycle comes around, we then we'll come back round to that potential growth and that struggle, that kind of growth struggle in the spring. If we are not clear on what we value most, and if perhaps we've gathered patterns that are not helpful for us, then when we do move into that growth, um, we might be pointing our compass in the wrong direction, as it were.
Mm, mm-hmm.
So, so each season feeds into the next, obviously.
Yeah.
But when we live seasonally, the seasons teach us essentially about really coming back to ourselves so that we
Yeah.
can live not just in alignment with the external world, but in alignment with our own inner world as well, which
Yes.
is why I love it.
It's so beautiful just how each season has a purpose and a rhythm, and just having those spaces to connect with different layers of ourselves, whether it's the joyful, kind of more extroverted part in the summer or the more introspective
Yeah.
part in the winter, and just checking in. How are
Mm,
things going? Am I living in alignment? I feel like there's not
mm,
space to do that anymore. And
yeah.
we're not slowing down to make sure, okay, things are okay, I'm on the right path. That's a big
Yeah.
loss. And we're constantly just
Yes.
pushing ourselves through and not discerning.
Yeah.
I love that word, I love when you ask, what is really worth my energy? Because our energy
Yeah.
is scarce as in HSPs. And we do
It
need that
it
time to
is, and
reflect.
it's not infinite. It's
Yeah.
I think when you slow down, you really start to understand how precious your energy is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and maybe, definitely what I have reflected on is how without thought I have given my time and energy away,
Mm-hmm.
and it's precious. I was actually only saying, I think it was yesterday, to some friends, about it before I kind of discovered this way of living or had started my healing path. I didn't actually realize my time and energy were my own. I know that probably sounds a bit odd. I don't know whether that resonates with listeners, but it's, fairly recent, probably late 20s,
Mm-hmm.
early 30s. I started this kind of, oh my goodness, my time and
Yes.
energy is actually my own.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
I think, that's pretty common that people forget that. I definitely do.
Mm.
Like, oh, actually, I have choice over
Yes.
how I spend my time
Yeah.
and where I devote
Yeah.
my energy. But there is so much external pressure and noise
Mm, mm,
dictating what we should be doing.
yeah.
It's so easy to forget or to not
It
even know.
is. It is. And it's not at all to have anybody feel bad if
Mm-mm.
they realize, oh my gosh, I've been pulled outside of myself
Yeah.
again. I still get pulled out of myself.
Mm-hmm.
But this is why this kind of seasonal living is so beautiful because you're provided with constant touch points. Within each of those seasons,
Mm-hmm.
you have got different things like the equinoxes and the solstices. Solstice literally translates to sun standing still. So
Mm.
it much like that, you yourself can just pause.
Yeah.
Even within the vibrancy of summer,
Yeah.
you have that point in June to just stop and reflect.
Mm.
And yeah, you can do a gratitude practice. You can think about how you're abundant, but it's also a chance to just go, okay, how's the first part of the year gone for me?
Mm-hmm.
Am I in alignment? Where is
Yeah.
my energy?
Yeah.
Draw it back in as needs be. So I love those touch points because I think HSPs need those points more than
Mm-hmm.
most to just draw it back in, constantly drawing it back
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, we really do. And it's helpful to see there's rhythms within each season where you
Mm,
can go a
mm,
little slow, touch down,
yeah,
and then come back
yeah,
out. So
yeah,
looking at those little moments that you don't have to just keep going at the same
yes,
pace. You can slow
yeah,
things down.
hmm
Um, and so it sounds like, winter is for me is kind of the natural grieving season. And you talked about it being kind of deep soul rest. We're going inward, and as we go
hmm
inward, we touch into those deeper emotions. But does grief show up in other seasons?
yeah. I think it
Mhm.
does. I think it really
Yeah.
does. First significant grief was, well, actually, it was probably a much beloved dog.
Mm.
But in terms of significant person passing, it was my dad in 2022. So still,
Mm.
still not that long ago.
Yeah.
And then that was followed by a very special lady,
Mm.
my husband's nan, but such a central figure in our family. And what I think has been interesting is that I think when a person dies, like the time of the year, then kind of leaves its little signature on that time of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad passed away in autumn, and so for me, it feels like a natural grieving time. It even feels like the trees are grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like it's
Yeah.
almost like a sorrowful energy as the trees are letting their leaves go. So I think it can show up in
Mm-hmm.
all seasons, regardless,
Mm-hmm.
and also regardless of when a person has passed away or whenever that loss has been felt. Each season brings with it um, something to bring that grief to the fore. So it could be a birthday, it could
Mm-hmm.
be a favorite tree. So my husband's nan, she loved cherry blossoms, and of course, in spring,
Yeah.
there they are.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, she chose a cherry blossom for us, so that's now in our garden. So it, it can come up at any point.
Yeah.
And I also think, whilst I agree, the winter, the darker months is that
Mm-hmm.
natural sort of inner grieving.
Mm-hmm.
When you come into the warmer months, spring and summer, I think there's something about external reminders, external things that
Mm-hmm.
bring the grief perhaps more outward. I'm not
Like
sure
a
if that makes sense, but
like a thaw that happens.
yeah, I guess so. Because, it's almost easier to be grieving in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
People perhaps expect it. People,
Yeah.
perhaps a little bit down in the dumps. It's
Mm-hmm.
dark and I think it's more easily available and accepted. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's a warm, sunny day, perhaps you're at the beach, perhaps you're at the park having a picnic, and you're bringing up a grief or difficult feelings that you're having about somebody that you've lost.
Mm-hmm.
I it can be difficult for other people maybe to sit with you in that and hold space for you in that, and in many ways, I think, well, like I've just said, there's more reminders of the loss because, perhaps that loved one would have been there,
Yeah.
and also in the period of growth when everything's growing and abundant, and I definitely found this with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a reminder that the world is continuing to grow without them.
Yeah.
So, and I think that can be really difficult.
Yeah, that's heavy to think, oh,
Mm,
I'm here experiencing this and they're not here with me. They're not seeing
yes,
this
yeah,
moment
yeah,
or getting to see the cherry blossom bloom this spring.
yeah,
It
yeah,
does bring those feelings of loss come up easily. Like you.
yeah, and other feelings too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
feelings of guilt can
Mm,
surface, I think, as well. Like, particularly if, joy and grief are
mm,
not far apart.
mm.
They're or joy and loss, they're very, very close together. You
Mm.
can be 1 minute enjoying an ice cream in the sunshine, like having a really good time,
Yeah.
and then choked up the next because
Mm-hmm.
you might be feeling obviously the loss, but you might also be feeling guilty that you're enjoying yourself and they're not here with you
Mm.
to experience it with you, or they're missing out, or all of
Yeah.
those feelings. And also, I mean, this is obvious, but just to call out, every grief is unique.
Mm.
And it was
Yeah.
interesting for me to have two deaths so close together, side by side, almost, and very, very different experience. Very
Yeah.
different because there was
Mm-hmm.
very different feelings around those two people, and so the emotions that come up with any reminder, anything. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
could have been a small. It actually came up um, the other day for me. I was at a concert. My son was in this youth choir thing, and there was a dad walking his little girl down the stairs to take her to the toilet, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having a great time, the kids were singing,
Yeah.
and then it just catches
Hit
you.
you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just in that moment.
yeah.
Some little reminder or emotion comes through, and then you're
Yes,
there. Yeah.
yeah.
I appreciate you saying that because there is this expectation to grieve in a certain way or in a certain
Hmm.
formula. And you're right
Hmm.
that each person grieves differently, but we then also grieve differently depending on the loss and maybe even when it happened in our lives.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. So many reminders.
So
And
many
I think
reminders.
I think there's so much expectation around grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is probably one of the biggest problems for the grieving process for HSPs
Mm-hmm.
is we're very sensitive to external expectation, and
Yes.
more often than not really want to we can be quite conscientious, can't we? And
Mm-hmm.
really want to be seen to be doing things right.
Mm-hmm.
And there is absolutely no right way to grieve.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and with, the heightened emotional awareness and depth
Mm-hmm.
and intensity and
Mm-hmm.
empathy that we can feel, there's most likely going to need a much deeper and longer integration process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, some people might be done quite quickly, but for most HSPs that I've come across
Mm-hmm.
that have gone through the grieving process,
Yes.
it can take quite some time. You've obviously got that
Mm-hmm.
acute grief phase,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it takes much longer to integrate into your wiring, your body, your
Mm-hmm.
life, the most. And also, I've had this experience recently, and I know won't mind me sharing, a friend who lost someone quite tragically,
Mm-hmm.
and for many reasons, she wasn't allowed to grieve that at the time, and she's held it for 20 years, and has only just started to process that grief, and the intensity is just as if it was, yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
it doesn't go away.
no, it
Have
doesn't,
to feel it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and you're right that we do grieve so differently than other folks as HSPs, with that deep processing and trying to make sense of the grief and feeling it so much more deeply and in more
Hmm.
complex ways, and then having the emotions bubble up so quickly with just one little reminder
Yeah.
or one moment of remembering the loss. It can just flood
Hmm.
right up to the
Hmm.
surface. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it sounds like we need to be able to follow our own path through the grief. And even though winter, it's more acceptable to grieve, making space in every season, whether it's because something does bring it back up for you or there's an anniversary, a
Yeah.
birthday, a memory, or the actual loss anniversary, that the grief is going to come up. And I've seen this happen with a lot of HSPs where those times of year, no matter what the season, the grief is heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, knowing that it's not as acceptable to grieve in other seasons because we're supposed to be more exuberant or active,
Hmm.
how do we work with our grief in summer or in spring or, through the seasons?
Yeah, I think for me, it
Mm-hmm.
comes through these almost rituals that I create for myself at these
Mm-hmm.
regular points. That's not to say that you need to schedule a date with grief.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you can, and I do,
Yeah.
um, but it's welcome. It's welcome through my door at any time. If
Mm.
it comes, just allowing it. Um, so allowing it organically, but in terms of being perhaps a little bit more proactive with it, it's, if you're practicing a seasonal way of life, then you can drop into these little pause points like the equinoxes and the solstices,
Yeah.
etc. There can be space within those times. Perhaps you've journaled on, I don't know, what have we got coming up? Well, not yet. still far away. We've got
Mm-hmm.
the spring equinox coming up. Whilst you might set aside some time lighting a candle, perhaps taking a meditation to think about the growth ahead, maybe it's also about having some pictures of your loved ones that you've lost, lighting a candle for them,
Yeah.
sending them a little bit of your thought and your love and
Mm-hmm.
care and gratitude for their lives, etc. Maybe that invites a moment to shed some tears and release that grief,
Yeah.
and also just having no expectation of that. And there have been times when I've sat down and perhaps I've been journaling about something seasonally, and I've lit my candle, I've said what I needed to say to my loved ones that have passed on, and that's been enough. I
Yeah.
actually have I call it my ancestors table.
Oh, yeah.
So anyone that's passed on, I have their pictures up, and I've got some candles and a few little pieces of rose quartz, bit of an offering
Mm-hmm.
to them. And so they are there throughout
Yes.
the year. They're there, so I can, just send them a little nod if I want to. But there's no expectation for me to be, you know, sobbing all the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
But the invitation is there if I need to release some grief. Those are those little touch points that I create, that little container for myself, um, to do that at any point in the year.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this last time, I think, but they're not my special peeps. They're on one side, and then I've got
Mm-hmm.
my like little seasonal space over on the other side. So the two spaces are very connected, and
Mm.
yeah. So I guess it's about creating space for
Right, you're
yourself
not.
to touch in.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think a lot of times we're fighting with the grief to try to keep it in the background or to not
Yes,
let it
yeah,
overcome
yeah,
us. But if we do create those touch points, those rituals, we know we have
hmm,
space for it and it's
yeah,
coming out regularly instead of building up and then
yes,
taking over.
yeah,
So we're acknowledging grief is here and
yes,
it's
yeah,
welcome. Yeah,
yes.
I appreciate that a
And
lot.
I have to also just highlight the importance for me of having a connection or a couple of connections to fellow HSPs,
Hmm.
um, who also have lost somebody, and
Yeah.
the depth of those conversations that we've had in our deep grief moments are have been of so much value.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say that's an important point to just sneak in there. Is it doesn't Grief really shouldn't be something that we do alone, but we so
Yeah.
often do. And I think it's great that we can have these moments for ourselves, creating our space, etc., and checking in. So important. And I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
say no, don't do it, but also knowing if you have those safe connections, those people that get it, that are not going to
Yeah.
turn you away and say this is too much,
Mm-hmm.
or you should be over it by now,
Right.
who are ready and waiting. And actually, I'm very grateful to have a couple of people that will ask before
Mm-hmm.
I've even,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Anticipate that
yes,
need. Mm-hmm.
yes. So if you have those people
Mm-hmm. Right.
reaching
Grief
out,
is to be shared and connected over because when we
yeah,
lose someone or something in our lives, it's so healing to know we still have supports and those people
yes,
to lean on and just space to not feel so alone in it, to know
hmm,
that we're not
yeah,
overreacting or we're not grieving for too long.
yeah,
Yeah, there's so much comfort in that. It's such a
yeah.
good reminder.
I think, sometimes it's not possible,
Yeah.
depending on the complexity of who it is you've lost, or also what it has been that you've lost, because grief is
Mm-hmm.
not always a person. It could be
Mm-hmm.
a job, it could be a situation, it could be a life stage. Grief can be associated with lots of things. Um, so sometimes the complexity of the grief might not afford us those connections.
Right.
So I'm conscious of that. Um, it's definitely an experience I have had with one of my griefs, if you like, one of my losses,
Mm-hmm.
was the connection, or the people to be able to grieve with and talk to about it was not so present.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, those rituals, those checking in with myself, and actually the building of a relationship with a fellow friend who'd been on the periphery. We weren't kind of deeply connected friends, but I knew that she had also lost someone recently, and so I reached out to, well, she may have reached out, I can't remember now.
Mm-hmm.
But there was we came together. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're feeling, I guess if any listeners are feeling, oh, I don't know who to talk to about this, there is
Mm-hmm.
no one. Maybe just reach out to somebody who you think might, you know, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
They might not feel comfortable with it, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's something to be gained from it. And
Yeah.
there are groups around, organized groups as well, that can be great
Mm-hmm.
containers.
So it could be an opportunity to build a connection if there isn't
Yeah,
one already there,
yeah,
potentially. Yeah, I appreciate that. There could be just room to connect with someone who you haven't yet or haven't been as close to. Yeah,
yes, yeah,
or like you said, there's a lot of grief groups around and could find community there as well if it's not someone in our own lives. Because there are those
yeah,
times where the people in your life they're not grieving with you because they haven't been through the loss or they just don't
mm,
understand or don't support, sadly. So it's important to find it where you can, at the very least having
yeah,
those connection points
yeah.
with yourself.
I think, you know, as much as grief can isolate people, it also can bring people together.
Yeah.
You know, I've been really surprised, you know, at comments that I've had when I've shared, you know, what I've been going through, from people that I wouldn't have even, you know, students in
Yeah.
my yoga classes,
Mhm.
or clients, and there is connection because it's a shared human experience that we all go through.
Right.
And I think sometimes if we're willing to just be a little bit vulnerable, then
Mm-hmm.
the connection can be made, and then that just you
Mm.
feel so much lighter. You know, we know this,
Yeah,
don't we?
me too.
Um,
Yeah. It's a good reminder too, because I think as HSPs, we often will take care of others and we forget to take care of ourselves and we
yeah,
forget
yeah.
to ask for help or support.
Yes, definitely. I think hyper independence can be
Yeah.
one of many patterns, and
Mm-hmm.
partly we don't want to burden others. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's where it can come from, and yeah, we forget to ask for help, definitely.
We do.
Um, so it's you know, grief can be a great teacher in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I appreciate thinking of grief with that purpose.
Yeah.
Like there's those undercurrents of connection and I don't know, just bright spots within the loss.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I I've talked about this a lot actually over the last couple of years, of the the gold that can be found within grief. Um, Sometimes I think it's helpful, maybe not in that acute phase, but
Yeah.
over time it can be, I think, can be seen as almost like a doorway
Mm.
through to like a deeper level of your own healing, or
Yeah.
a deeper level of yourself. I definitely feel like a changed person since
Mm.
my losses, um, both in the sense of it being particularly losing my dad was quite a traumatic event
Yeah.
because it was massively unexpected. But then there's the transformation, I think, that goes through, that comes with looking at that relationship you had with that person, how that loss impacts you. You know, there's almost like this looking back of all the memories and conversations had, and everything that comes with your own personal grief, because each one's unique. There's like an opportunity to go deeper. And what does this mean to me? How is this kind of reorganizing my worldview and who I am and how I'm living my life. It can be a real kind of portal, if you like, to deep transformation, I think. That's what I found.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The portal. 'Cause it
Mm,
really does take us into a different
yeah,
phase or part of ourselves to go through this. I mean,
yeah,
it's incredibly hard to lose someone so close to us, and
mm,
it can be a point of growth and reflection. And so
yes,
I love that you said that there's gold within the grief.
mm,
What a beautiful reframe of grief. And of
yeah,
course, that
yeah,
will come after the initial, like you said, the
of
acute
course, yeah,
loss.
yeah,
But as we
yeah,
go through it, there's other things to discover about ourselves and maybe even about the relationship with that person or that time of our lives that
yeah,
we can start to appreciate. Yeah, I thank you for that, for kind of adding more complexity to it. Because I think we see it as just this one note.
yeah,
And as HSPs, we have that ability to dive deeper and look at those
yeah.
layers.
I think there's many aspects to it.
Hmm.
Um, so many aspects.
So many.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so
many.
many.
I like to think, we lost a couple of grandparents a while back, and I started asking myself the question, what has that person taught me? What has that person's life taught me? Um, and like you say, after that initial acute phase, when you are just really feeling the loss and the shock, which is really jarring, especially for HSPs, the whole system is just thrown into chaos, I think, for quite a while. But after that phase, I think that's when you can start the natural reflection that we're so often very good at. And I think that is the point at which we can then it's almost like, grief is a little bit like how trees, when they lose their leaves, it provides compost for the growth to come. It feels a little bit like that. The loss of somebody will, and is definitely in my case anyway, is fertilized or is adding nutrients, if you like, nutrients to my growth.
I love that. It's like that energy, that spirit of that person, it keeps going
Yes.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not lost. It
And this is how
transforms.
we live through each other, don't we? We pass on and to each generation, and so the cycle continues. So yeah, I mean, I do think there is a choice. We can choose to accept the offering from the loss, or we might not.
Mm, choose to accept.
Mm.
Yeah. Is there a way that we can? I'm just thinking, how do I choose to accept? Is it just how I talk to myself about it or how I'm thinking about the loss?
I think the power of intention comes in here, being I when I lost my dad, which was a very, very complex grief. After the initial shock, and believe you me, it was a massive shock. He was only 66 and he'd been playing golf the week before, so there was no warning. Um, After that initial shock, I consciously made the intention to be fully present for it all because I knew we had a very complicated relationship, difficult, complicated relationship. And I knew, and this is probably going to sound a bit strange, but I knew that if I was able to remain present with it, with the very caring guidance of my own therapist, that his passing could be a gift for my healing because there was a lot there to be dealt with anyway that I'd already been exploring in therapy myself. So there's an intention Probably slightly naively taken by myself, not probably knowing the full extent of what that journey entailed.
Sure.
But what has come out of it has been transformational for
Mm.
me and my family, my own children, my other relationships, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, intending to work with it, and it might be that the intention is, okay, I'm going to park this
Mm.
for a time because
Mm-hmm.
my life is not quite set up for this yet,
Sure.
and then I'm coming back to it.
Yeah. Right. You,
Yeah,
but you get to choose the
yeah,
path you walk through your grief, whether
yes,
when you're going to do it and how you're going to do it.
yeah,
Yeah, that's helpful to remember because I think for me at least, grief has felt a lot of times like I am not in control. Like it's just
mm,
washing over me, but to know we can
yes,
have those touch points and those intentions. We
yeah,
can steer the grief as we need to and come in and out of it as we're able to. It's
yeah.
helpful to remember
I
that.
think, yeah, I think with grief, you're dancing with both no control and
And yeah,
the power to have some control over
yeah.
it. But I do think when we intentionally work with it, it does give us
Mm-hmm.
back a little bit of that sense of control. Um, that we are choosing, okay, today I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to work with this, or not. I'm going to stick on Netflix and
Yeah.
eat some ice cream.
Whatever it takes.
Mm,
Yeah, so we can choose how to care for ourselves. We can come in and out. That's you hear that a lot. Grief is um it's a cycle, right? You're
yeah,
coming in, you're coming out of it. It's not linear. So yeah, we can do grief however we need to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And pacing with any of these
Pacing.
things is really important because
Mm-hmm.
it is so easy to become overwhelmed. And we haven't talked about this, but oh, the fatigue involved
Yeah.
in grief is intense, to say the
Mm-hmm.
least. And as HSPs, we're already probably chronically
Yeah.
tired.
Yes. Yes, we are.
um, so I had to lower my expectations when I did a deep dive
Mm-hmm.
after Dad's passing. So I think when you are going into it, it's knowing, okay, I'm not going to be on top of X, Y, and Z. I
Mm-hmm.
am going to have to lower my expectations, increase my self kindness and self care practices by tenfold, and sleep as much as you can because our
Yeah.
brains, our wiring needs so much more integration time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's absolutely okay.
Absolutely okay. Because
Mm,
the energy has to come from somewhere. So we have to
yeah.
rest more. We have to slow everything down. We have to take care of ourselves and fortify ourselves for this journey.
Mm,
Just like if you were going on a trip, you would pack up supplies and you would rest and you would
yeah.
fuel up. And we have to do the same for grief, it sounds like. Find
Yes.
your resources.
Yeah. And I think relating it to the trip,
Mm-hmm.
when you're extra sensitive, I think we probably do a bit more prep. We might
Yes.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
Google all the places to eat that are close by. We might look
Yep.
at the buildings where's nearby for a walk. We would
Mm-hmm.
map it all out. So
Yep.
probably the a bit of research, but okay,
Yeah.
what's grief going to hold for me? What should I expect? There is
Yeah.
a lot of preparation that can be
Mm-hmm.
helpful
Mm-hmm.
in going into it.
Yeah, we can learn about grief and what we need.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Nicola, I'm wondering if, as we wrap up, if there's a final message that you could share with HSPs who are going through some type of grief, what would that be?
Mm. I guess you're not alone, and you are entitled to feel whatever you're feeling whenever for as long as you need,
Yeah.
and it's never too much.
Hmm. It's never too much.
Mm,
Thank you for that.
welcome.
So, I will share all of your seasonal resources for folks so they can dive into. I know you have a YouTube page with seasonal practices. Folks could start to work with you there. You also have a Sensitive Soul Space membership with meditations and therapeutic yoga, other seasonal resources. So a lot of ways that folks can work with
Yeah,
you. And then also you offer yoga therapy. So I'm wondering if you could share
correct.
with
Yeah.
listeners just a little bit more about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, so the yoga therapy is I really feel it's a beautiful offering for HSPs because it gives you that real tailored and bespoke approach. And really, each session is very individual and centered solely on what the needs are of the person in that time. And it could include movement, it could include breath work, it could involve talking things through, meditation. It really does depend on what the person brings. Um, and I like to make sure that when I start with a person that we kind of really get to grips with what that person is like, what their sensory profile is like, so that we can tailor it exactly. And it can be really helpful for any point where a person feels a bit lost or is going through a life transition or a grief, for example, because grief in particular gets trapped in the body often. So that can be a helpful way to just support yourself as you're processing that grief or whatever life transition you're going through. So yeah, it can be a really beautiful process. I love it.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that movement can be helpful to move those emotions through, especially
Mhm.
grief. And then you're coming into a
Yeah.
community space just to be around others and feel that support, maybe indirect or direct around the
Mhm.
grief, but just to have other people around can be such a balm during a
Yeah.
hard time.
Yeah. 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 Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, Nichola, thank you so much for everything that you shared today and just helping us understand how we can be with our grief in different times of the year and also different times of our life. I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.